Welcome to this section of New Start for the family. We have finished new. Now it's time for the start. The new stands for what? Nutrition, exercise, and water. And now it's the start word, and the S stands for sunlight. You know, there's been a lot of changes in research in regards to sunlight in the last few years. There was one group of physicians that probably had the greatest pulpit in regards to sunlight over the last 20 or 30 years, and that specialty of physicians were the dermatologists, and many of them instructed people to stay out of the sun at all costs. And if you were in the sun, make sure you put on plenty of sunscreen and just block that sun from getting into your system in some way, shape, or form, because it might increase your risk of skin cancer, and it might increase your risk of some premature wrinkling and aging, and so stay out of the sun. Well, as you'll find out today, that information is very limited and very misguided, actually, and when we take a look at sun from the comprehensive perspective. First of all, let's back up and just talk about sunlight. It's actually the world's actual energy source. In fact, all of the energy that we have originally came from the sun. And these other areas of energy really are storage vehicles storing energy from the sun. And of course, that's true even with the fossil fuels, etc., and where that energy originated from. And of course, we see quite a relationship between sunlight and life. Growth of plant and animal life is dependent upon the presence of sunshine. Life is most prolific in the tropics, where there is an abundance of year-round sunshine and where the intensity of the sun's rays is the greatest as well. And that's why around the equator area, particularly if those areas are available to hydration, you're going to see just lush vegetation and things being able to grow very easily. Contrast that with the Arctic region, where there's a scarcity of sunlight, and life is scarce or absent altogether. And so we see quite a relationship there. Now, sunlight has been used as a treatment modality in disease throughout history, and particularly recent history has also documented its relationship in treating certain diseases. Madsen, a physician from Denmark, actually studied the 37-year compilation of Danish medical records recently. These records are unusually complete because in Denmark the law requires that every physician report every case of infectious disease which he or she treats. So unlike in many Western societies where we treat infectious diseases and it's just documented in the medical record, we don't report it at the end of the day as to what infections we treated and how many, etc. But in Denmark, they do that. The statistics provided by Madsen show that disease, particularly infectious disease, occurs most frequently during the season in which people get the least sunlight. Diphtheria, bronchitis, bronchopneumonia, tonsillitis all run up to a peak in the winter months and fall into relative insignificance during July and August. In fact, taking an average of all diseases, what he found was February was the month most conducive to the development of infectious disease. And of course, that's after a few months where you're getting very little sunlight, or the sunlight's there because it's cold, people are not going out into it. September was the best month from the standpoint of public health. And of course, that's after a summer of that sunlight exposure. The conclusion is inescapable. The prevalence of disease corresponds to the amount and intensity of the sunshine. The more sunshine, in general, the less disease. The less sunshine, the more disease. historically back in World War I. Very interesting study was done in regards to the treatment of wounds. The treatment of wounds which do not heal, sunshine turns out to be of great importance. World War I, thousands of German soldiers were treated with sunshine with deep wounds which simply would not heal in spite of the most adequate medical attention. It was left to Bernard of Samden, an old surgeon who gave up the use of the knife for sunbathing to help these unfortunate soldiers. He first took the 4th German Army Corps, and before the war was over, he was sunning the supposedly incurable wounds of nearly the whole German army. His success was little short of phenomenal. The most severe wounds, which had failed to respond to any type of medical antiseptics or disinfectants, rapidly healed under the influence of sunshine. And so instead of having people indoors being treated with wounds, we really need to get them outdoors and even have the wound itself exposed to sunlight. Now, what there hasn't been a study, what recently has replaced sunlight for the treatment of wounds and medical conditions is hyperbaric oxygen, which is a very expensive treatment where you're put in a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. And of course, there's risks to that to some extent, but the benefits far outweigh the risks in regards to the rapid healing. And it would be interesting to do a controlled trial actually comparing sunlight with hyperbaric. We don't know how that would come out, but we do know that sunlight is a very underused treatment for wounds. Now, there are several advantages of timing in regards to your exposure of sunlight. Morning sunlight turns out to be very important for human beings to be exposed to. First of all, it's morning bright light that sets your body clock. And so when you get up in the morning, if you're exposed to bright light within 10 minutes of awakening, that's going to set your body clock. And by setting that body clock on a regular schedule every day, you are going to be far healthier. You're actually going to sleep better at night, and you're going to have a number of other processes set in motion that will be helpful. A lot of people don't realize that light is a treatment for insomnia. And we have a lot of people complaining about their lack of sleep or ability to sleep or lack to be able to get to sleep, or they wake up too early and can't get back to sleep. Sunlight is one of the most primary therapies in helping insomnia, particularly that morning sunlight. And as pictured there, the blue sky has some additional advantages. If you have a cloudy sky, you need more exposure to the sun to get the same benefit. If it's blue sky, you only need about half the exposure to get the benefit in regards to serotonin levels and other advantages. And of course, that morning sunlight will start that serotonin production through the eyes. And that serotonin molecule is very important in elevating your mood. It's very important in keeping you calm. In other words, it helps in emotional intelligence when you're under stress. It improves daytime energy, and it's calming to the anxious. So it has that dual benefit, and we get that through morning sunlight. Now, if you live in an area where you're not able to get that sunlight first thing in the morning, or you're in the northern latitudes in the wintertime where you may not be getting much sun at all, you really need to get that bright light somehow. And the people up in Norway, for instance, they're very familiar with this need, because all of them will suffer from insomnia and depression in the wintertime unless they're exposed to bright light. And just like we have gas stations on every corner in America, in Norway they have light box stations on every corner, and people will go in for their medical light box therapy and get that bright light. You need at least that 10,000 lux of white light for 30 minutes, or you need lesser intensity of the blue light for about 20 minutes is all you need. But it's best to get that in the morning time. And unfortunately, I found out in this country and a lot of other countries, they're not familiar with this. I gave lectures in Alaska, and it was amazing the rates of depression and mental health issues in Alaska And a lot of people assume that people of poor mental health just seek out Alaska as a place to live. But that's not necessarily the case. There's people that are mentally healthy when they get there, and then over the course of time, they become less mentally healthy, and they don't realize this need for this light box treatment in the wintertime. Also, morning sunlight has been shown, if you're exposed to more of it, like 60 minutes in this particular study, it improves luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone comes from the pituitary gland in the bottom of the brain, and it improves testosterone levels in men, and it improves female hormone levels, estrogen and other female hormones in women. And as a result of this morning sun, women with irregular menstrual cycles will have their cycles become regular again. If you're having hormonal issues and you're a woman, one of the most simple therapies is making sure you're getting that bright light first thing in the morning. And if you're a man and having problems that are complications of lack of testosterone, and we've had many individuals, in fact, the television advertisements are prevalent in regards to taking high-dollar medications, $8 a pill for men to get over their ED. And you'd be surprised at how 35, 40-year-old men are having problems with this. When in yesteryear, in the agricultural society, men in their 60s, 70s had no problems with that. Why didn't they have any problems? They were out there early in the morning getting that early sun and getting that luteinizing hormone. And by the way, these $8 and $10 pills, do they improve testosterone levels? Not in the slightest. Where the light therapy will not only improve the ED, it will improve the testosterone levels, the muscle strength, the courage that can come with that, etc. And so it's an important remedy. But again, emphasizing that if you're not able to get that remedy for any reason outside, which would be the preferred way, get one of those medical grade light boxes. This isn't just Reveal light bulbs, by the way. It does require a medical grade light box to do that. However, it's not just morning sun and morning light that's important. Midday sunlight is also important. What do we get from midday sunlight? Ultraviolet B rays. And when they come in contact with the skin, the morning light you want to get through the eyes. The daytime light you want to get through the skin. It produces vitamin D under that skin. And in the last 10 years, there have been literally hundreds and thousands of studies on vitamin D and its relationship to health. That midday sunlight of getting your vitamin D is best obtained from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. And so there's just a 3-hour window in most months to get that. And if it is summertime, in other words, June and July in particular, these months, and if you're fair-skinned, if you get out in the sun in shorts and a tank top, it will only take 10 minutes for you to have 10,000 units of vitamin D produced in you. And that's a significant amount. The nice thing about getting it from the sun is you don't have to worry about overdosage. And so you could actually get 50,000 units, which is the prescription vitamin D if you're short in vitamin D, but you also want to avoid that sunburn as well. Now, if you're very dark-skinned, if you're extremely dark-skinned, you will need up to 30 times that exposure. So that might mean 3 hours of exposure to get 10,000 units. Now, you don't need 10,000 units every day. The average individual from the sun needs only about 1,000 to 2,000 units every day. But if you're way behind in vitamin D and your vitamin D levels are extremely low, that's when we would recommend getting 10,000 or more units every day until your vitamin D levels have a chance to get up. And sometimes 50,000 units a day in a pill form is necessary for those that are very low in vitamin D until they catch up, and then after that they can keep up with just rather minimal sun exposure. So June and early July, You can actually get vitamin D anywhere from 10 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's a significant advantage if you live in the northern hemisphere. November through February, you can't get vitamin D at all if you live north of the 42nd parallel. So even at high noon, if you're north of the 42nd parallel, you can't produce vitamin D. Well, what can these individuals do? Actually, if they get enough vitamin D through the other months, vitamin D is stored in the fat. It's a fat-soluble vitamin. And so one of the advantages is if you're out and getting a lot of summer sun, it can store you over to some extent. When the individual has that time of November through February, they may want to go ahead and just take a vitamin D supplement to be sure that they're there. There's the 42nd parallel, and that's the 42nd parallel in the northern hemisphere. And that line in the United States goes through Boston, Massachusetts. It goes through Chicago, Illinois, and it goes through the northern border of California. And so above that, you're not going to be able to get vitamin D November through February. Now, the 42nd parallel on the southern hemisphere, you don't have to worry about so much. That's just the bottom portion of Chile and Antarctica. And so everyone else lives in places where they can get vitamin D, even in the winter months, which would be, June and July, in May, etc., in Australia and the southern hemisphere. Well, let's summarize a number of these studies in regards to the advantages of getting vitamin D from the sun. First, you'll never get overdosed from the sun. You can get overdosed from supplements, and if you are taking supplements, you want to get your vitamin D level measured, particularly if you're taking over 4,000 units a day. Most people can take 4,000 units a day very healthfully and not a problem. But if you're getting 10,000 or more units a day, you can get up where you're toxic in vitamin D, can cause bone problems, brittleness, and other problems as well, calcifications in arteries, etc. And then, of course, if you're getting it from the sun, you get other non-vitamin D sunlight advantages like the serotonin and then melatonin at night. If you're not making serotonin in the daytime, you can't make melatonin at night, so you're not getting as restorative a sleep. But remember, in getting it from the sun, avoid the sunburn, particularly those deep sunburns, which increase the risk of melanoma and other problems. A very light sunburn, some of the recent evidence is showing, is not really harmful per se. And so if it's very, very light where you're not going to peel, it doesn't seem to be an issue. If you're an indoor person and you're not getting any outdoor sun, a lot of people have indoor jobs and they can't get outside even for 10 minutes between 11 and 2 in the afternoon. Then you really need to take a vitamin D supplement. So let's take a look at vitamin D, the most studied vitamin in recent years. It helps with calcium and magnesium absorption and prevents osteoporosis. In fact, osteoporosis is much more a problem of vitamin D lack than it is calcium lack. A lot of the emphasis before vitamin D was on getting enough calcium, and studies showed the people who got the most calcium had the most osteoporosis, and it was kind of confusing in regards to that. But the problem was not that they weren't getting enough calcium, they just weren't absorbing the calcium. And you need vitamin D in order to get adequate absorption of both calcium and magnesium. And of course, these minerals are very important in regards to making melatonin, so you get better sleep. Vitamin D is critically important. I don't know how many patients I've had that we found out their vitamin D levels were low, and they didn't even tell me that they had problems sleeping. And we would get their vitamin D levels up, and within a couple, 3 days, they'd be sleeping through the night like a baby and just thinking that that wasn't possible for them anymore. Just by getting enough of that vitamin D, being able to get calcium and magnesium there and making the melatonin. It can help muscle pain. A lot of individuals have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and it's actually a problem of vitamin D deficiency. And then we find out their vitamin D levels are low, adequate vitamin D, the muscle pain is gone, their energy levels improve, and even chronic back pain has been associated with low vitamin D. In fact, if you take a look at all back pain sufferers, you'll see the highest rates of vitamin D deficiency among virtually any group are those with back pain. It's an immune enhancer. Actually, vitamin D is almost misnamed. It's not really a vitamin. It's actually a hormone. It's not something that we need to get in nutrients. It's something that our own body makes. Hormones are something our own body makes, but it makes in response to something, and that is sunlight. But the advantages of vitamin D in the immune system are still being researched, and we know it's one of the most powerful stimulators of the immune system, and thus it's important in preventing cancer and preventing infections, as we talked about earlier as well. It also decreases the risk of heart disease and stroke significantly. In fact, one study showed that your vitamin D level was more related to whether you would have a future heart attack or stroke than even your blood pressure. And we know hypertension is one of those major contributors of heart disease and stroke, not to minimize the effect of blood pressure, but it seems to be very much up there in regards to that type of risk factor that's there. It decreases diarrheal diseases and gastroenteritis. Vitamin D is very important in the field of gastroenterology. People that have problems with their GI tract, we're always measuring their vitamin D levels. And studies show if their vitamin D levels are adequate, they'll actually have 50-fold less bacteria in their intestinal tract than if their vitamin D levels are very low. And thus it's a treatment for infectious disease of the gastrointestinal tract. One study showed it even helps significantly with Clostridium difficile, one of those deadly infections that kill many Americans in the Western world from the after effects of antibiotics and killing out some of those good bacteria. It elevates mood. Thus it's used in depression, anxiety. We talked about how it helps with sleep. And it also helps with age-related cognitive decline in some studies. So as you age, your memory tends to not be as clear, and just getting adequate vitamin D from the sun is critically important in regards to that. Now, one thing I should mention, we mentioned the darker skin you are, the less you're able to make vitamin D, the more sun exposure you have to have. But it's also true that the older you are, the less vitamin D you make. So the older people actually need a little more sunlight to get vitamin D. And also, the more obese you are, the less vitamin D you make. That too much fat under the skin actually prevents that vitamin D from being made to some extent. And thus we see higher rates of vitamin D deficiency in the elderly as well as in obese individuals. And by the way, tanning booths are not a reliable source of vitamin D. Studies show that they actually don't quite penetrate deep enough in most cases. So you might get a little vitamin D, but not near as much as what you would get from sun exposure in general. There are some tanning booths that produce that deeper ultraviolet wavelength, and others that, and most that don't. So don't don't rely on that substitute there. If you're wanting to get a substitute, it'd be better to take a certain dose of an actual supplement than going to a tanning bed. And then one study showed a 65% reduction in the rates of Parkinson's disease in those with adequate vitamin D levels. So this is just new research. We're not sure if this is going to pan out or if vitamin D will be useful in the treatment of Parkinson's or slow the progression of it yet. But we do know that if you are low in vitamin D, you significantly increase your risk of this nervous disease as you age that is very crippling. Weimar, we're actually speaking here at the campus of Weimar College and NEWSTART Center. We treat modern diseases, cancer, heart disease, hypertension, depression, all sorts of diseases here with our NEWSTART program. But prior to having the NEWSTART program at Weimar, Weimar was known for its treatment of tuberculosis. And one of the treatments that was very effective was sunlight. It was actually the primary treatment modality for TB. Survival rate was very high. This has been studied recently and published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, and it says exposure to sunlight during the development of a metabolite of vitamin D is necessary for the macrophage to engulf the tubercle bacilli. And of course, that's the TB organism. So it's not just vitamin D. Vitamin D is critically important, but vitamin D plus some other effect of sunlight that actually helps to destroy tuberculosis. And thus, most people that came, vast majority of people that came to this sanatorium with significant TB left far healthier, and they did not die from their tuberculosis. Well, some people ask the question, wait a minute, the sun causes cancer. We've heard about it the last 30 years. Dr. Edward Giovannucci, well-known Harvard University professor of medicine and nutrition, recently laid out his case in a keynote lecture at a recent American Association for Cancer Research meeting in Anaheim, California. His research suggests that vitamin D might help prevent 30 deaths for each one caused by skin cancer. And he's talking about 30 deaths spared just as a result of vitamin D and its cancer prevention mechanism. He said this at the conference: I would challenge anyone to find an area or nutrient or any factor that has such consistent anti-cancer benefits as vitamin D. The data is really quite remarkable. And we know it reduces colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer. It reduces even blood malignancies, lymphomas. The list is continuing to go on in regards to the research and how the deadly disease of cancer can be, in many cases, prevented. Well, last, what about afternoon and evening sun? Mid-afternoon sun can prevent early morning awakening, where you awaken and can't get back to sleep. If you're having that problem, you need a mid-afternoon sun exposure. It will actually prevent it. Evening sunlight helps prevent premenstrual tension syndrome and can also assist in keeping you sleeping for 7 to 8 hours before awakening. So our premenstrual tension patients, we actually have them exposed either a light box or sunlight 7 p.m. Very helpful. They're not getting vitamin D then, but it's that light through the eyes that's very important in preventing and treating that. So I ask you here today, why not get outdoors in the sun? Replace screen time with what type of time? Sun time. And then think about combining the NEWSTART principles. We've already covered 4 of them, but you can combine nutrition and exercise and sunlight by doing what? Gardening. And so we can be more efficient by combining a lot of the NEWSTART principles. There's a couple of gardeners out there enjoying the garden vegetables, working, getting that vitamin D, that midday sun, and obtaining a far greater health. So why don't you begin a new start today? Thank you very much.